So, let me talk about something called the people promise. In HP, essentially, we decided about a year and a half ago that we needed to reshape how people felt or what the experience was like in working in HP. And, employees kept talking about this thing called the HP way, and the HP way was lost and so forth. And so we said, let's think about this in terms of making sure we create the right environment for people. But that doesn't necessarily mean being sort of just the nice guys or creating a touchy-feely environment. It means creating the right environment where people can essentially do what they need to do to be the best they can. So this is essentially what the people promise is. Basically, we asked people around the world, and as I said, HP is a very global organization, and what's interesting is when you look at the focus groups of what people said they needed to be inspired, to be excited about coming to work at HP, was very similar. And it's interesting because we expected to have differences from a cultural standpoint, from a country standpoint, and from a business standpoint, because HP is made of a diverse set of business portfolios, but the answers were the same. And I think the key thing to note here is that it's not just about paying people more. It's about making sure they've got the best managers, making sure they've got interesting work, making sure that basically the environment is supporting them to be the best they can be. And ongoing development is a key aspect of that. So we essentially basically said, let's form something that we call the people promise. And we made a promise to employees. That promise essentially was, we will help you. A little bit of an accident back there, it's okay. Wasn't part of this presentation, by the way. So we will help you to be the best you can be. We will develop you, we will train you, we will pay and reward you, assuming you're doing a good job. And in exchange for that, you can stay with the company, and basically you can build a long-term career at HP. So this people promise has become the foundation or the extension of what we used to call HP way. And there's lots to it. The basic premise here is there's no single answer. People go to companies for different reasons. Sometimes they want to go to a company that's well respected around its global citizenship. Sometimes it's about making sure that they get the best training and development. When you talk to younger people, they're probably more focused on what's in it for me and how do I get promoted and how do all those good things happen that I see all happening to all my friends that came out of college. And it's different for our workers as well. So the strategy around the different aspects of our workforce, going from the young to the old, taking into account cultural differences and other things. The deal that we made, so as I said, this is not just about creating a nice environment. The deal is that with employees, we said we'll train, we'll develop, all the things that you report out of the people promise. But in exchange for that, you need to perform. And that was one of the things in HP that was a legacy issue that had been in the company for a long time. in actual fact happens is that it becomes an HR initiative rather than a business proposition to help drive the business. So we have linked many HR processes together because one of the things that managers complain about in the HR organization, HP is quite creative and innovative around some of its HR practices, but the complaint that came from it, it's great that you're doing this work around talent development, or it's great that we've got a really creative sourcing strategy, but what is it that, how do I bring all this together? And essentially, this will forms the basis of how we manage people at HP and what managers are expected to do as part of the performance. So essentially, they plan up front around the skills and capabilities. They then manage the talent. They then focus on career development, and we've got several processes around career discussions and how to tie those to development discussions and so forth. That has really been the foundation for managers to get back to the basics of basically having a conversation with people around what it is that they need to be successful and how they will do it and how the company and how their managers will support them. Again, it sounds quite basic, but I want to highlight that to you because sometimes the beauty is in the simplicity of what we're trying to manage. And HP being HP, we've spent many millions of dollars in investments on very interesting and new trends around how to manage the workforce, but essentially it comes down to those basics. So we have basically said for people to succeed in HP as part of the performance culture, if you have all those things, you have managers that are doing a good job, you know what you need to do, basically you have an opportunity to grow. First of all, you need to be a strong performer, and I'll talk about how we've aligned our reward system around that in a second. You need to live the values of HP, and this is really important because I'm sure many of you know that you sometimes get performers that are great performers at the expense of everyone else, and so that is not constituted in terms of what we think great performance is at HP. Great performance is about doing the best job you can, but also instilling in the culture a set of leadership values, a set of knowledge, a set of experiences that really make you align with what HP stands for as a company. And the values of HP have been tried and tested for the last 70 or so years and still are the foundation of our success. So, I talked a little bit about the fact that we need to make sure, first of all, as part of the deal, that people are managing performance. The next part is that as part of that, we're structured more around career development. So what does that mean? Essentially, one of the, advantages of being in a larger company is that you have scale to have people experience different things. So within HP today, now with the EDS integration, we've got 5 distinct business models. And they're not divisions, they're essentially different businesses that are housed under the HP brand. And that's important to note because it means we have different customers, we have different markets, we have different But over the last year and a half, as part of the promise and as part of creating a culture around development and performance, essentially what we've done is said we're going to be much more systematic and proactive around it. What that means essentially is we've built systems, we've built organisations that manage the talent, we've put a lot more responsibility in terms of manager education and so forth in place to do that. The other key thing that I think is important is that, one of the things that HP did is it had a multi-million-dollar investment in training and development, and continues to have today, the size of the workforce. But I spent a lot of my previous years in a training function, and we realised that we were kind of running around chasing our tails. So in other words, what we were doing is we were spending money producing new programs, but not necessarily impacting the skills and then ultimately impacting the business to the extent we want to. One of the things that came clear, and again, it's a beauty of having the size and scale, is that you said the best way to develop people outside of some of the basics is basically give them the experiences. And the experiences that you give them is basically focused on getting them to try new things, whether it's stretch assignments, new jobs, etc. It's been a difficult change for us to manage because people think, and especially managers think when they talk about development, that essentially the answer is I'll send somebody to a training course. But in reality, the chance to give people new experiences, whether it's working in a new business, a new project, or whatever, is really where people grow the most. They sink or swim essentially, and we hopefully make sure that they swim rather than sink in the support that we give to the manager's approach. Manager, you please tell me what I need to do next. And that's actually not the right response. Because what we've said is, people manage their careers personally. They are responsible for making sure that they get the skills and capability which continues to make them competitive. They are able to make sure that they align with whatever business or function that they're working in, and they are truly able to optimize their performance to the best of their ability. So it's really important as we've shifted away from training being the answer to development. They would look to keep the best people on their teams. They would be very reticent or reluctant to move people around to other organisations. They'd make all the best excuses in the world as to why it wasn't possible from a business impact standpoint. And we've had to do a lot of education for managers in order for them to understand that actually they need to put the HP hat on, not the specific business or function that they're working in order to basically help HP. And when you put the HP hat on, that's where you say, I'm going to let my best talent go to this other job in this other business unit. Because ultimately, if I don't let my best talent move to this other job, they're going to leave and join another company, and then another company is going to get the benefit of that talent. So it's been a tough message, but again, positioning it in the context of business impact, positioning it in the context of basically if we don't support development, we'll go somewhere else, is a desire that we've really been pushing with managers. It's something that we've been changing over time. So we have a rigid talent process. I made reference to it a couple of times. Essentially, we have a system, we assess talent needs on a 6-monthly basis, we go through a process, and there's a plan created. And that plan includes succession planning. So you can do a lot of work on talent. I'm sure a lot of people in this room spend a lot of time assessing skills, competencies, capabilities, etc. But at the end of the day, whilst it's really good to have all those objective processes, at the end of the day, you can build a succession plan for someone that says, if you do this, and then you do these 3 other things, this is where you're going to have a potential to end up, assuming you perform that, is a much more powerful discussion. So our focus on talent has been really around succession planning and development. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of things. I mentioned before about rewards. Basically, we want to make sure that we are always competitive. I mean, that's a basic. But the one difference is we've structured, we haven't changed the way our pie of rewards, but we have essentially, I'd like to leave you just with a couple of things. First of all, when you make a corporate shift around culture, it's not a program. It's basically an initiative or a set of initiatives over a long period of time. So if you're expecting short-term results, you're probably going to be disappointed by whatever program you're on. Secondly, it's about the leadership team, because whilst we can be very creative in the HR teams around how to support, essentially we need managers to speak the speak and make sure that those messages are clear to employees. And you will always get the cynics, there's always people that will always be the most vocal about how bad things are. My advice is ignore them and focus on the people that are not that way. So I hope that in the last few minutes I have been able to at least give you some highlight on the perspectives around what HP has been doing to change the corporate culture. I'd like to turn over to Victoria now.
Professor Marcik, before we start, let me make one comment. Mr. Vavakis presented a case for HP, program for the people promise, and the idea is to how to match employee aspirations with corporate performance. Idea, and he described the career development and talent management. I'd like to ask one question, perhaps you can think about it after the second presenter can answer. We expected something along the line of how to provide the corporate environment where innovation can be made. There is sometimes failures, risk-taking, all this. So you mentioned that, but in HP, how do we make the corporate culture so that people can take more risk? Because risk-taking is a very important element of starting innovation.
I'll hold that question.
Professor, please.
Thank you very much, and it is really a great honor for me to be here and to contribute to this very important conversation. I want to thank the organizers for including me in this panel. I think the example at HP is a very good illustration of a company that takes innovation and creativity seriously. And what I'm going to try to contribute to this dialogue is to take a step back and, having looked at what people are writing about, what they're researching, what they're thinking about in terms of what is really important around creativity and innovation, and how is that then going to be able to help us to build a corporate culture that supports these things. And so that's where I'm going to go with this presentation. If anybody would like an electronic copy of the presentation, and if you don't have access to it, if you give me your business card, I will email it out to you afterwards. But there are several big ideas that I want to emphasize in this short time that we have together. And the first one, in some ways, is this very interesting relationship between, as the last question was raised, between creativity and innovation. And these terms are sometimes used in the same sentence, sometimes used interchangeably. They are definitely related, but they're not exactly the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit about how creativity is much more related to individual talent, if I want to start with these definitions, there are really three key people who you find all the time in the literature around. There are many more than three, but three of the ones that are most found are Teresa Amabile, who did some early work at the Center for Creative Leadership and developed an instrument for how do you assess the climate for creativity called KEYS, K-E-Y-S. The second person is Rosabeth Moss-Kantner, who has done a lot of work with innovative companies to look at organizational capabilities, and a third longitudinal study by Van de Ven and colleagues at the University of Minnesota over a long period of time on what's important for innovation. And so drawing on some of those people and others, one of the most often quoted definition around creativity is from Teresa Amabile, and it is the production of novel and appropriate ideas. So it does involve certain personality characteristics. It involves things like aesthetic sensitivity and intuition and the tolerance for ambiguity. But in addition to that, it involves a work climate or a climate in the environment that supports creative people. Things like the ability to gain deep domain expertise, critical thinking skills, and a priority on intrinsic motivation. While I think it's very true, as the HP example is, that we need to have the right kinds of rewards in place, it's also true that the most creative people do it because they're just interested in being creative. And so how do you create a climate that really supports that intrinsic motivation is really key to success. And then also looking by contrast to innovation, we have to turn then to what are the group and organizational capabilities that support developing, bringing those creative ideas and using them effectively in the organization. Before I talk about what the literature says about what some of these things are, I just want to briefly identify a definition for corporate culture because it gets used a lot and we're not always talking about the same thing. And it is true that it's values and beliefs and norms in the organization, but it's also true that culture is about the behaviors that are supported. It's about the practices and systems that get put in place that are in line with the values and beliefs in the organization. So we're going to look at a little bit of both in this session. And I must also, as a number of people have pointed out, the culture of the country, the culture of the many people who are in the diverse workforce definitely have an impact on what you can or cannot do in organizations around innovation and creativity. And we can't force fit what people say from this literature, for example, in Korea or in another country, because it may or may not work exactly as it is identified. So the framework that I'm going to be using to help to synthesize this is, we call it strategic leverage through learning. And it really kind of also, as in the Hewlett-Packard presentation, we look at learning, but we also look at performance, because the two are tied together. And learning is most effective in workplaces when it's driven by ability to contribute effectively to the performance in the organization. And so we need to look at them both. And so this framework actually helps us to develop a profile of what is it that we should be looking for, and then not to be just left to chance, what is it that the organization must do on what we call a transformational or transactional level to really support the development of that culture. So it enables us to design interventions and to change them to track where we're going with them. So the framework, as I said, has outcomes. We call them interim outcomes. These are things in the area of innovation and creativity that if you find them in your organization, you actually can, with some difficulty, track them towards performance outcomes. In addition to that, we found that oftentimes people try to build innovation cultures overnight. And as you have just said, that doesn't usually work very well. And so while it's very important that change happens at what we call a transformational or fundamental level, it's also very true that we can do a lot by working with transactional kinds of change factors. And so we'll look at some of both of those in relationship to building this culture. So this is what the literature says is important, some of the highlights on what this culture might look like in these different categories of innovation, learning, knowledge, expertise creation, alignment, and commitment. It's not surprising, given the definition of creativity, that one of the things you will find is an abundance of new ideas. The kind of learning is very small changes that need to be made, while big changes outside of the organization cause a need for fundamental change. In fact, Dorothy Leonard says that our core competence can quickly turn to core rigidity if we're not paying attention to what's going on outside the organization. In the area of knowledge and expertise creation, these are things that we've talked about before in terms of what kind of talent is central to creativity. What do you need to look for in knowledge and expertise? I think one thing to signal is that if you have talent who have deep knowledge in certain areas, one of the challenges is how do you then get them to talk to one another across boundaries, which is central to innovation. And one of the strategies out there is to make sure that you have people who have what are called T skills, from the letter T, deep knowledge in some areas, but knowledge across different domains, so that when you get people together in groups working together, they know how to talk to one another and bridge differences. Alignment is really important. We've heard that in a number of places. So you need to get everybody working towards the same goals, but the alignment can't be too consensus-driven, because if it's too consensus-driven, or if you're working in a culture where, in fact, everybody has to line up and salute, but they are holding different points of view, then you won't have innovation. And so we talk about optimum alignment, aligning towards the goal, but also allowing freedom and autonomy and the ability to get differences out on the table. So the coordinations and linkages have to be there, but they have to be kind of loose and flexible. And finally, the kind of commitment to innovative people. Innovative people really want to show their stuff. They want to be able to think, they want to use the ideas that they have. One of the gentlemen working in knowledge management, Prusak, often says, why is it that organizations spend a huge amount of money recruiting the best talent in the world, and then they make it impossible for people to talk together or learn from one another? And so one has to create a culture where the commitment is to the growth, the use of the capabilities that people have. So if you did have these outcomes, what else would have to be going on in the organization? Well, at the transformational level, there are a number of things that have to do with the way in which the organization and people within it pay attention to the environment. There has to be constant scanning of the environment to try to understand what are our customers doing, what are the new preferences out there, how can we bring that in and use it to make a difference, to think about our mission and our strategy. At the same time, there also has to be enough clarity and movement together that creativity and innovation doesn't just bring you all over the map without pulling together for a key strategy in key areas that are important to the organization. The leadership is always important for anything. In innovative cultures, leadership needs to be transformational. And I think we heard that this morning with Jack Welch. He was showing us one version of what transformational leadership might look like. It looks different for different companies, but what is certain is that it's a leadership that leads mostly by example, by influence, by helping people set vision, by supporting them as they move forward to goals, rather than by micromanaging, by making sure that everything gets done right, but it takes all the energy out of the work that people do. That leadership should be able to support asking difficult questions, modeling change themselves, modeling creativity and innovation themselves. And then finally, the culture has to be one, the key question that was asked. The culture has to support risk-taking. It has to support risk-taking that isn't necessarily reckless, but that does enable people to try out new things. One key thing, I think, in innovation, as opposed to just creativity, is you can't innovate unless you can collaborate. Collaboration is really central to innovation. And so how is it that you can create ways for bringing people together to work to create these new ideas and products, and not lose people's freedom and autonomy? The area where most of us can do more work, and an area where the literature actually has done a lot of important contributions, is, what about the day-to-day part of work? The literature and research has identified a number of things that people really can do to support creativity and innovation. The manager, of course, workforce and the supervisor are very key to all of that. It is shown that supervisory encouragement, not just for completing tasks, but especially socio-emotional support, making sure that people know that they're important to the team effort, that their work is being valued, is really critical to success in innovative companies. Also, to be able to create an environment where people can communicate openly and share ideas across boundaries. The second category, structure, is one that people worked in very early in the area of innovation studies, and it was suggested that perhaps an organic structure is better for innovation than a command and control or bureaucratic or hierarchical structure. And that means that there should be flexibility, decentralization, opportunities to share decision making. These are all important to innovative cultures. And then finally, in the last two areas, systems and work climate. Definitely the systems vary in each company, but they do need to be in place to support the flow of communication. And not so much just that it happens often, as we heard this morning with Jack Welch, but also that diverse opinions and views can be brought out and shared. And then, of course, the learning systems need to be appropriate to the culture, and there need to be work group and organizational processes to make sure that coordination happens. And finally, the work climate is one that really needs to support not only socio-emotional support, but also work group encouragement. And of course, you have to have the resources and technology to do your job. So how do these work together? These next couple of slides just show that most of us cannot really start with vision and mission and strategy. That's for the leaders at the top of the organization. But many of us can start in these areas. We have found that through our work that you can change management practices, you may be able to change structure, and certainly you can change climate in your own work group. You may be able to create new systems that are available in your work group, even if not at the whole organization level. And that then can begin to get us some of those outcomes that I've just talked about, which then in turn pushes back through feedback loops and enables you to get more at these deeper fundamental changes that have to be done in a company. So this does not happen overnight, as we heard with the Hewlett-Packard example. It happens somewhat slowly over time. So how can we jumpstart it? How can we make jumpstart is an American word for kind of getting it together and getting it on the road quickly, or moving it forward more rapidly. Well, knowing what to do does not necessarily help us in knowing how to do it and being able to execute. And so when you look at the literature, there are companies certainly that have made abrupt changes, and they then have to change the culture in very obvious ways. One of the companies that I've studied says that what they did was they created a culture that screamed innovation. They moved their headquarters, they rearranged how things were done, they changed dress codes, they changed the way in which the leader interacted with people in the company. But the other way is a longer and slower way, and often occurs by kind of recurring cycles of experimentation and change. In that, learning is definitely, knowledge and skills developed through education and training are valuable, but what's far more important is the learning that's done on the job as innovation is being put in place. Colgate-Palmolive, for example, has a strategy of what they call bundle books. They start an innovation in one part of the company, they document it very carefully, and then they and managers who are involved in it go to other parts of the company to help people understand what they did and adapt it to their part of the company. And so these iterative cycles of trial and error and experimentation, with learning often being very informal and sometimes very firm specific. We did a study a couple years back of 42 people who worked key that enable you to begin to try to change the organizational culture a little bit. So it goes back to those transactional kinds of practices that then can push at the transformational supports and barriers in the organization. These are just some other, one of my students has been doing some work in mature companies and with action learning design for innovation. And he, Jeff Kuhn, has found that these are critical capabilities that the action learning program must develop. Sense making, strategic thinking, critical thinking, divergent thinking, conceptual clarity, and a malleable or a learning organization. In that company, some of the things that they make sure is that projects really are high-risk, high-gain kind of projects. They make sure and support the modeling of innovative behaviors by people that the people in the program get in touch with. And they also make sure that the right people are selected for the program, because everybody is not really open or interested in working in innovative ways or being part of a cohort that does that kind of thing. And then finally, the learning has to support deep questioning, challenging people's mindsets, crossing boundaries. And in this way, the projects really can kind of become a transitional way of beginning to move out and change organizational capacity by experimenting in teams and taking that out, and also by getting the leaders who now develop and work in new ways to take that back to their home environment. And finally, the organization gets a bonanza because great new project ideas are developed that the organization can adopt as part of their business strategy. So this picture then just sums up, and I'm going to stop here, that action learning, I think, can really be a very effective tool for developing creative and innovative culture in organizations, because it engages both the individual and the organization, creativity and innovation, and it kind of creates trainer wheels, or a place where through the project work you can make transactional changes that will then help with transformational changes.
Thank you very much, Professor Marsick. 조던영 상무 안 오셨어요?
Is Mr. Joe here?
Discussion, but he is not here, so thanks to him we have a lot of time for discussions. Professor Marsick's presentation was more conceptual, I would say, compared to the case study of HP. But I would like to ask the same question. You emphasized action learning and strategic leverage through learning, but maybe I didn't get the point, but could you little bit more explain a little bit about the relationship between innovation, creativity, and these programs, perhaps?
Okay, thank you. Strategic leverage through learning is not so much an intervention as it is a framework or a way of thinking about how to go about change. So the strategic leverage through learning, what it enables you to do is to find out what are some of the important things that we should be
조직 내에서 꼭 발견되도록 해야 하는 요소들이 무엇인지를 나열하는 하나의 기본 틀이다라고 볼 수 있을 것입니다. 그리고 또 조직 내에서 혁신을 저해해야 하는 방해물들을 파악을 하고, 또한 보다 많은 혁신을 배양할 수 있는 지원 요소들도 파악하는 과정이다라고 볼 수 있을 것입니다. 아시겠지만 한국이 그리고 또한 유교적인 그런 문화에서는 때로는 워크그룹 그리고 조화 이러한 거에 대해서 강조를 하는데, 이것은 지원 요소이기 때문에 이러한 요소는 잘 활용을 하고, 또한 반면에 만약에 문화 자체가 새로운 아이디어를 제시하는데 이것을 장려하는 문화가 아니라면 이러한 요소를 뺄 필요가 있겠죠. 커뮤니케이션이라든지 다른 분야에 있어서 그런 방해물, 장애가 있다면 이런 것을 철폐하도록 하는 것인데, 이러한 프레임워크는 사고를 배양하는 것이라고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 조직 내에서 변화를 꾀할 수 있는 하나의 사고의 방식이라고 이해를 해주시면 되겠고요. 액션 러닝은 액션 러닝이라는 것은 때로는 어떤 돌파구적인 변화가 필요한 경우가 있죠. 펩시코는 그런 영업 리더들을 대상으로 학습을 했을 때 중요하게 봤던 것 중에 하나는 새로운 시장에 진출을 해야 될 때 어떻게 해야 될 것이냐, 그리고 또한 다양한 세대를 넘나드는 그런 고객층을 대상으로 어떻게 성공을 구가할 수 있느냐라는 그런 프로젝트로 했었는데, 이 프로젝트는 혁신적인 프로젝트이죠. 그래서 이런 혁신과 관련된 프로젝트에 있어서 AL이 유효하게 사용이 될 수 있겠고, 그리고 또 우리가 인재들이 서로 간에 협업을 하고 또 혁신을 할 수 있도록 하기 위해서는 어떠한 방법들이 필요할지에 대해서 생각을 해야 합니다. 때로는 장애물이 이런 혁신적인 아이디어를 이야기를 하도록 독려하는 문화가 구축이 되어 있지 않은 경우가 있을 수도 있겠고, 또 조직 내에서 팀워크가 제대로 발현이 되지 않은 그런 조직일 수도 있거든요. 그래서 이러한 AL이라는 프로그램은 트레이닝을 제공해주는 프로그램일 뿐만 아니라 실제로 현실 업무에서 어떠한 문제를 직면을 했을 때 이 직면했던 문제를 풀어나가는 그 해결책을 마련을 하는 과정에서 우리가 왜 성공하지 못하고 있는가, 왜 우리가 실패하고 있는가에 대해서 다시금 생각을 해보고 반추해 볼 수 있도록 해주는 하나의 프로그램입니다. 그래서 실제로 현실적인 일일 업무에 있어서 혁신에 저해하는 그런 부분들을 파악을 하는 하나의 과정이다라고 볼 수 있겠습니다.
제가 덧붙이고 싶은 부분이 있는데요. 마시 교수님께서 말씀하시는 것은 조직의 성공에 무엇이 과연 정말로 중요한지 이 부분이었습니다. 때로는 사람들에게 이제 성과를 요구를 하는데요. 특히 어려운 상황 속에서도 그 상황을 개선하기 위해서 각각 해야 할 일을 하도록 요구받습니다. 그런데 어떤 경우에는 혁신이 이루어지지 않고 혁신이 실현되지 않는 경우가 있다고 주장을 하지만, 사실 제가 보기에는 특히 경제적인 상황이 더욱더 어려워질수록 사람들이 이런 메시지를 전달해야 됩니다. 우리가 어떤 변화를 이끌 수가 있는가, 목표를 달성하기 위해서 어떤 일을 해야 되는가, 이런 질문을 해야 됩니다. 목표, 그러니까 혁신에 있어서 어떤 목표를 가지고 있는지가 가장 중요하다고 생각합니다. 실제로 혁신을 하면서 목표를 달성을 해야 된다는 것이죠. 목표를 설정을 해놓고 그 다음에 어떤 수준까지 능력을 이끌어 올리게 되면은 혁신을 할 수 있다는 것입니다. 그래서 우리가 이 목표를 달성해야 되는데,
The innovation aspect becomes very practical. In addition to, I think, some of the things that were outlined by Victoria around, having these focused projects or focused sessions or focused opportunities around innovation. So I would just challenge people to say that in a normal day-to-day environment, everyone has an opportunity to innovate if they are clear on what they need to do.
Thank you. Okay, now let me open the floor for question and answer. If you have comments, questions, please raise your hands, and you can identify yourself first and ask question to a particular person, or you can just make a comment. 네, 마이크 좀 주시겠어요? 마이크 있어요?
is the microphone ready?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Willie Linse. First of all, thank you very much. It was a great presentations from both of you. Traditionally, companies measure on a kind of leadership, leader level, or on an engagement, on an outcome level, how things are going as far as maybe creativity or leadership performance or all the various things we try to measure. What I hear from you is a lot of things around organizational behavior and organizational system and organizational process. Could you indicate?
마이클 부사장님께 여쭤보고 싶은 것은 HP 내에서는 여러 국가, 여러 지뢰에 걸쳐서, 여러 비즈니스 유닛에 걸쳐서 이런 여러 가지 구성 요소들을 어떻게 측정을 하고 있는지 궁금합니다. 그래서 프로세스, 시스템, 또 기업 문화 이런 것들을 어떻게 측정을 하고 있는지 궁금합니다. 그리고 마시 교수님께서도 경험을 토대로
and then you can answer. Maybe we can go 2 rounds, perhaps, with a time limitation. Other questions, please. Here, 2 questions. 여기 마이크 좀 이쪽에.
Thank you for a great presentation. Unfortunately, we find that in bad times, the first to go are the HR people. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of HR in maintaining creativity and innovation in the organization?
Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Shirley Korn. I'm a HR director at a Korean company called Culture Minds, from the Minds Group. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's a tough question. Next, please.
Hello, I'm Bene Rache. I'm from the Chief Trainer of Influence. Thank you, first of all, for coming to Korea. And just from my experience, people here in Korea, they have a challenge practicing innovation and creativity. Can both of you maybe give 3 tips how people can practice in their daily lives innovation and creativity? That'd be great. Thank you.
Sounds very practical. One more maybe. In the middle, lady.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Okay, you go ahead since you have a microphone.
I'm Lydia, and I have a question about talents. So what do you do with those talents who do not match to the creative environment? And the second question, do you have to adjust the creative environments for those creative people, or do you adjust creative people to those creative environments? Thank you.
Okay, why don't you give the microphone to lady in the middle, but you will ask question second round, okay? Wait, and I'll ask the speakers to respond first. Maybe Professor, you first this time?
Well, shall I try one of them and then pass the microphone, and then maybe we can go back and forth? Well, I maybe will address this first question around measuring of creativity and innovation. And I think that's something that people, find very, very important. One of the examples that is in my paper is both the PepsiCo and the Cisco programs have systems in place by which they measure the outcome of the program around creativity and innovation. So as many probably in your experience, and many people here will have experienced the 360-degree feedback kind of approach to assessment. And they have identified, capabilities in the organization that have to be exhibited around creativity and innovation that are assessed before and afterwards. Also, people take a creativity self-assessment prior to the program in one of those companies. Can't remember which exactly at this point. But the measurement is done in those programs in particular in 2 ways. One is measurement is based on how creative are the project ideas and solutions. So in action learning programs, the team presents their ideas at the end of the day, and people from the top management team and other key people can assess how creative or innovative those solutions are, and that's across several programs that I've seen. But in addition then, there are the evaluation of individuals against some set of criteria that organization has decided are really important around creativity and innovation.
So I'd like to say thank you for your innovative way of asking questions too. So I'll try and remember a little bit about what were some of the questions that were asked. But let me take a couple from over this side of the room. The first one around the HR. It's an interesting. It's actually not a phenomenon at HP, and I think it's a testament to people understanding that HR is not a separate entity and a living separate organisation, but actually an important part of managing the business. And we've had to drum that, into the way we operate over many years, because it's very easy, and I kind of referenced this before, it's very easy to roll out an HR initiative or an HR program. It's much harder to have a manager say, this is a key part of how I manage my workforce and ultimately how I manage my business. So that's where I think the opportunity to really make sure that HR is seen, and I know it's a little bit cliche, but seen as a valued business partner in any way, in the same way that any business manager or line manager or marketing or CEO is essentially. And you have to change your speak. You have to forget about all the HR jargon and words and all that we use and say, look, what's the impact of my activity to your bottom line? And I think if people can remember that, it helps them to avoid getting, reduced when times are tough, right? Maybe that was a really difficult question, the other one that you asked, I think, from Ben over there. But just off the top of my head, I think on a personal level around how you create an innovation and a creativity, I think the first one is that you have to remind yourself that you have normal patterns of thinking about things and a context in which you always see the world through. And it's sometimes as simple as saying, I just went through this experience. This is typically how I manage this, or how I would think about this. I'm actually going to think about this a little bit different and step out of someone's shoes and step out of my shoes and look at it from another perspective. I think that's the first one. I think the second one is, it sounds very simple, but be open to meet new people. And whilst, we're all busy and we have many things going on in our lives and all that, it's amazing when you get on the bus and talk to the person sitting next to you on the seat, how much information and how much different perspective you can get from those people. I think the third thing is basically that you should always challenge yourself to do new things. And that sometimes is difficult in a day-to-day context. But, whether it's going for a walk instead of watching TV, or, going and working out instead of, taking up a new hobby. All of those things inspire people to think differently out of the world and get them out of the context that they're used to working in. So, you can translate the same thinking to an organization as well. And in the sense that you can say to people, stop thinking about, the current context and think about a different way of looking at it. You can encourage networking, which I think was one of Victoria's key points. And you can basically create an environment where people are really stepping out of that. And I think that's what innovation is about, without necessarily creating a so-called innovation program.
Well, I'll add to a couple of those. I agree that one of the challenges with HR is that we often, people who work in learning and development or HR, we create our own ghettos. We create ways in which we alienate and isolate ourselves from the productive work of the organization. And so the companies that we've looked at in particular and have been talking to, that is not as likely to happen. They really work very closely with the businesses, as you pointed out. Many of them, HR goals are not set except in conjunction with the setting of business priorities. And so there's a process that gets put in place so that when the periods of time in the organization where business priorities are set, HR is also part of that conversation, and HR doesn't do things that aren't part of the priorities of the business. So I think that just reinforces or elaborates, doesn't maybe add anything new to that point. Tips for being creative. I have a colleague who was a CEO. He's an Australian, from Australia. He's a lawyer originally, and he was the CEO of a number of different companies. And one of the things he advocates very strongly is to have time and space quiet for yourself. And even though as a busy CEO, one of the things he did when he was in New York, he lives in New York now, and when he was working with a company there, he would have his the transportation that took him to the office drop him off on one side of Central Park, and then he would walk through Central Park, and the car would meet him on the other end. And in that period of a half hour or so, as he was walking, was his quiet and his thinking time. And his staff knew that when he came back to the office, they were not to disturb him until he took all the ideas that he had thought about while he was walking and put them down on paper so he wouldn't lose them. So I think finding a way for yourself to have quiet time, which I realize is a big challenge in the kind of lives that we lead, is an important step for creativity and innovation. And then I think this doing things that are different, is important. Yesterday we had the chance to visit you and Kimberly, and they were telling about how it is that for their employees, they give them time to go to art exhibitions or to music, to places outside of the normal work life, so that it kind of gets them to think of things they don't normally think about. It would not fit many of the training and development list of activities that many companies have, but they have art exhibitions and music talent as some of the things that they have on their list. So I think, that also speaks to one of the problems in the United States, certainly, I think, is that although we give a lot of lip service to people and the valuing of people, we basically are asked to leave who we are at the door when we walk into a lot of organizations. And I think that's one thing that young people in particular, at least in the United States, have said, I'm not leaving myself at the door. So if you want me as a talent in your organization, then you have to find ways to enable me to be who I am and to express myself, and not just to be what the common brand, the brand of the organization might be. So maybe that speaks a little to the question of, do you fit the person to the organization, or do you fit the organization to the person? And the literature would say that if you want to retain creative talent, although people do have to be socialized somewhat into the culture of the organization, you have to really create a space that allows people to be more of themselves. And so I think there's more support for cultures that enable people to be not necessarily so conforming to a set of clear criteria, which is the company's way of doing things. I think it does matter that they follow the goals. The goals and the tasks, as you said, if they're not working to support the key strategy and the products of the organization, they're probably not going to be in the organization. But personality-wise, there's more room and space for supporting that.
I hope we answered, if not all, many of the questions you raised. We have a few minutes left, so let's collect perhaps 2 or 3 more questions. There was a question in the middle.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Louisa, and I'm a business lecturer professor here in Korea. We have interestingly actually used the HP example in one of my classes in performance management. So what you have said is actually very relevant to what I'm teaching. I have several questions, and I suppose they might tie in together. I'm not really quite sure. But one of the things that you've said is the changes in the corporate culture that you try to, or you have successfully installed in HP. When we did the case study of HP, we looked at how the process that you changed. And what I'm interested in knowing is, what did you do to overcome resistance, assuming that there is resistance? I mean, people don't like changes. We all know that. And you have also said that you started tying performance to rewards. And again, that is a huge change in your corporate culture. I've worked, when I was a student in England, for AdTrans, which is ABB Daimler-Benz Transportation, which is a train builder. And they actually also tied performance to rewards, and everybody hated it. And so they actually lost a lot of people as a result. So what did you do? And the third part of the same question, I suppose, is that you said ignore the cynics, people who are cynical about it. But what about the more vocal people who are like huge troublemaker? What did you do? So, sorry, it's so long.
Any other question? Here, in the front.
Thank you for coming today. We're really enjoying it. I hope this session today is going to inspire all of us in this room to go back and innovate and create in our organizations. Mr. Jung, I have a question for you and for the rest of the panel. By the way, my name is Faisal Sekwan from Influence. And the question is something that you brought up. It's based on something that you brought up at the start, which is in Korea has been very good at taking things that have already been innovated and turning into something that's a great product or service, and also taking those innovations further. Now we're coming into a challenging time, and that model is not going to work for us anymore. So my question is, in a culture that's been corporate culture that's been following that model, which is, the innovations come, let's copy it and improve on it, how are we going to change the corporate culture now? What are some tips that you have to changing the corporate culture through training, through leadership, whatnot? Something very pragmatic. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last. Over here, please.
I do research on HR systems and reward systems. One of the key tensions between performance and HR systems is how do you balance individual and teamwork or collective effort and reward them. I think this is related to the lady's question, because the underlying principle behind performance reward systems is internal competition. How would you balance that? And given that you run you run systems in many countries, when you do your rewards formula, to what extent do you consider cultural or culture? And the percentage or maybe the weight that you would assign to that. Thank you.
You have 1 minute left each for answering the questions. We have 1 minute altogether, but we'll use 2 minutes of the rest time.
Okay. I guess my minute's up, right? I'll answer the question from the lady. So it's never popular to make a shift to a culture that rewards performance when everybody used to get a piece of the pie beforehand. Basically, it has not been an easy process by any means. We have had to do several things. So it sounds quite harsh, but essentially, first of all, we need to set the context for people. So the reason why you shift your focus from fixed dollars that you give to everyone to performance-based, again, is a business priority. It basically says if the business is doing well, you will receive reward. If the business is not doing well, you will not receive reward. So that context setting is probably the first thing, and many people can understand it if they have the context for it and they don't see it as this is just another takeaway. The second thing is you need to cascade through the management team. And where I think HP has basically had to make some shifts is if sometimes managers were not supportive and they were not able to impart the messages the right way, basically we've made changes. And so that's the harsh bit that I mentioned before, that essentially, you have to basically do that. The benefit is, because HP has been successful over the last few years, we've actually been able to pay people for their performance. So paying people makes people happy, so then they're more inclined to accept the changes.
Maybe I'll just try to address a little bit of this challenge of balancing the individual and the collective. I think it's always a tension and dilemma, and probably in many cultures, in many situations, you run into that. One of the ways in which people have been doing that for getting different ideas out on the table so that you could have some collaborative effort by the team, but you could also honor what individuals have to say, is through a number of different kind of structure. I call them structured protocols, or there are certain ways of doing things that everybody knows is somewhat artificial, but you do them in that way in order to be able to enable everybody to contribute their ideas, even though under other circumstances maybe the group, the collective kind of norm would not allow that to happen. So the GE workout that was developed in GE and has been adapted by many different companies is one of those ways. I work with a protocol I call action learning conversations, where I get people to do a lot of listening to ideas of other people rather than talking and answering back. And there are certain ways of doing things that are not, you wouldn't do it in normal everyday life, but you can create dialogue and discussion around it using those ways of doing things. So I think that's one way. And then there are a lot of companies that I know of that have struggled with this question of group rewards versus individual rewards. If you have a team, do you reward on the basis of the team performance or on the basis of the individual contribution? And I think there have been some companies that have experimented with ways of doing both. It's not an easy process, but it can be done. So I think you have to find ways to engage both of them rather than pretend that one or the other is the only thing that's important.
Thank you. There was a question to me. That's a billion-dollar question. How to transform organization focused on execution to innovation. I would say how to transform execution-oriented organization to execution and innovation. You have to do both, right? So we call it ambidextrous organization. And at the organization level, one is the flexibility. And that means, perhaps less hierarchical, that try to make the organization flat and flexible. Second one is the diversity, by allowing more new ideas from outside and also more new people from outside. You can make the organization change. And third, try to change your culture, like change your dress code, things like that. But you used to certain culture for 20 years, 10 years. It's not easy to change overnight. At the individual level, at least in my organization context, that's the research organization, I think the key to creativity is the ability to ask your own original question. Because to be able to ask good question is the beginning of the creativity, I think. Okay, we are a few minutes behind, but I guess we did our work today. So thank you very much for your contribution. And also I'd like to thank the audience for your active participation. The corporate HR has 5 more sessions, so your unsatisfied appetite will be hopefully better served in the next 5 sessions. This will conclude our session. Thank you very much.